People are obsessed with race. They're obsessed with, well, I'm a woman, or I'm a man, or I'm this, I'm that. And I'm like, why don't we just treat each other as individuals? I thought that was the point, right? I don't particularly care what your background is. It doesn't really matter that much to me. What matters is, what kind of human being are you? What are you saying? What are your ideas? How do you treat me? How do you treat other people around you? That's what matters.
Konstantin Kisin, welcome to Beyond. How do I describe you? Political satirist, social commentator, comedian, podcast host. Is there anything else?
I don't do comedy anymore, so not comedian.
I just hear other people introduce you that way.
I know. Well, I used to do stand-up.
Yeah, I know
used to
that.
do stand-up, and author of Sunday Times best-selling book.
Oh, yes.
Did I give you a copy of my book?
No, but you should. An Immigrant's Letter to the West.
Love Letter to the West.
Love Letter.
Yeah,
to
an
the
immigrant's
West.
letter to the West is kind of like ambivalent. That could be like, F you guys, whereas I'm not like that. I'm like, the West is good.
Why specifically to the West?
Because that's where I am. And I also think the West is very, very good. The West is where it's the pinnacle of human achievement today in terms of the way we see the world, and in terms of culture, in terms of all the things that we claim to care about, you know, women's rights, equality, etc. Like, we've done the best on that.
Claim to care about.
Yeah.
Okay. I heard you on Tom Bilyeu's podcast,
Yeah.
and you're like, I know my mission, and that's to make people more aware. Aware of what?
That our society is being dragged off in a in the direction of weaponized empathy and a kind of toxic compassion. And because of that, instead of doing the right thing, we say the right thing. And we've confused the two. So you have people saying something that sounds good, but the end product is bad outcomes in the real world. LA is a very good example of this. It's like you have a crap ton of people on the street who are addicted to drugs, who are being sexually assaulted, who have terrible mental health issues. And the reason they're there isn't because you don't have enough money. You're the richest country in the world. You can really, really afford to take care of those people. The reason is, at some point, people decided that mental health hospitals, which were bad, they were terrible, are unkind, uncompassionate, etc. And the compassionate thing to do is to let people, you know, be free. And so they're free to be sexually assaulted and take fentanyl, right? And that is just one out of a billion examples I could give you, where instead of doing the right thing, which means looking at what works and what doesn't work, instead of that, what we're doing is what sounds good. What sounds good. And it's the same in every area of life. BLM is a very good example. I don't mean to make this controversial, but there's lots and lots.
Make it.
Well, look, BLM, defund the police, right?
Yeah.
That single idea has hurt more black people than the entire American police force combined throughout the history of the United States, right? Because the moment you defund the police, the neighborhoods where there's most crime, which happens to be minority neighborhoods, they are the ones that suffer the most, because it's the areas that have the highest amount of crime that need the highest amount of police. And all sorts of other things. There's a friend of mine called Rob Henderson who calls it luxury beliefs, which is beliefs that people like to have, but quite often don't live to themselves. Ideas about sexual freedom and marriage and stuff like that very often will come from people who are happily married with kids, but they'll be very comfortably telling other people, don't do this, don't do that, just be free, just have fun, just do this, just do that, while themselves have a family of 3 kids and look after them and teach them the right values.
Why are they the ones that are saying that, you think?
It makes them feel good. It gives them an idea in their head of having status and being clever and being compassionate and being, you know, because it feels bad to imply that people should do something this way and not that way, right? Because live and let live, which I believe. However, we've confused the fact that people should be free to do whatever they want with the idea that choices don't matter. Like, you can do this or you can do that. Yes, that's true. But if you do this, these are the consequences. And if you do this, these are the consequences. And we've forgotten that. Or we've decided to say, you can't say that. You can't say that if you do this, this will happen. And if you do that, that will happen. And on the subject of marriage, I don't think we should be telling people to get married. I also don't think we should lie to people about the idea that various forms of relationships are all equal. They're not, right? Statistics on this are very clear. Married people are much happier, live longer, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It doesn't mean you should run out and marry the first guy you see on the street, but we shouldn't pretend that that isn't a reality that exists, right? It's the same with any other issue. And so for me, the interesting thing is, it's weird being me because all I do is say some really obvious things, right? In a quite uncontroversial way, in my opinion. And people freak out and lose their shit and therefore give me attention and therefore have a big
But what do they
platform.
freak out about the most? Like, what have you received the most backlash on that you feel like is obviously true and helpful to society, but people are freaking out over and, you know, getting emotional and being like, well, you can't say that? Like,
if there's a few things,
Okay.
and you've observed some of them.
Okay.
But I suppose the number one thing is I'm a first-generation immigrant in England. And the thing that I always try to make the point of saying to people is there is racism in Western societies. But where else would you rather be a minority? Where?
I mean, what's it like in other places? I don't know.
Well, let's go down the list, shall we? In China, only a few years ago, they had a commercial where a Chinese girl is being hit on by a black guy. She shoves him into a washing machine, puts the product that is being advertised in the washing machine, and he comes out Chinese, and she's really happy.
Wow.
Right? Japan, notoriously very kind of exclusionary culture. Russia, where I come from, brown people and Jews and whoever would quite often be, when I was growing up in the 90s, beaten in the street. You know, gay people attacked in the street for being gay, etc. What are the other? India, you know, it has its own situation going on. Iran. Where are these places that we are supposed to be comparing ourselves to? Where are these places? And so the point that I'm always making is, yes, we do have problems in our societies, but we are the most tolerant, the most open-minded, the most progressive, the most welcoming people in the history of the world. Let's stop dividing ourselves along racial lines and go, you're this and you're that and whatever. I thought that was the dream. I thought that was what we were told we're supposed to be working towards. And instead, we've regressed into, well, as a black person, or as a Jew, and as a, you know. I find that conversation incredibly boring. Incredibly boring. For some reason, people are obsessed with it now. People are obsessed with race. They're obsessed with, well, I'm a woman, or I'm a man, and I'm this, and I'm that. And I'm like, why don't we just treat each other as individuals? I thought that was the point, right? I don't particularly care what your background is. It doesn't really matter that much to me. What matters is, what kind of human being are you? What are you saying? What are your ideas? How do you treat me? How do you treat other people around you? That's what matters.
I've heard you talk about victimhood a lot. And you said that people get rewarded for being victims by our society, the way that it operates now. How are they getting rewarded?
With attention. And that's why, you know, it started out being something that these kind of like woke progressive people did. Now the right is doing the same thing. Look at us. Look at what they've done to us. Look at what it, you know, because it's how you get attention. Social media, where a lot of this stuff is coming from, rewards people complaining, rewards outrage, rewards people presenting themselves as the victims of some evil oppressive force. Whereas if you go on social media and go like, hey guys, I just think, you know, your life's your responsibility, go out there and crush it as best you can.
It's not as popular.
That's, well, you know, right? It's not
Yeah.
going to get anything like the same response. So we've created a communication system that rewards people with attention, and we live in an attention economy.
So how do we change that? Because I think you and I both want to change that. My experience is that once I started focusing less on our political figures and more on like entrepreneurs, the VC world, my life got a lot better, and I started making more money, and I was like, holy shit. And the realization I had was, it's because these people are problem solvers. All day, these entrepreneurs are sitting there trying to solve problems, and they see life as their responsibility. So what's your take?
Well, my take is A, to spread that message, and B, with Trigonometry, which is now moving from being a YouTube show to being a media organization, we're going to have other people come under our umbrella, etc. Trigger Media is essentially where we're going, is to change the culture through the way we have conversations. And long-form discussions like this don't reward. If I sat here crying about how blah, 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 it wouldn't really work, right? And so I think it's the medium is the message. You heard that phrase? The medium is the message?
What does it mean?
It means that where you have a discussion matters almost as much as what you're saying, because it determines what you're going to say. If you are operating on Twitter, that will force the conversation to be a particular way. If you're having a conversation on a 3-hour podcast, that will force the conversation to be a different way. Do you see what I mean?
And the 3-hour podcast is more effective, you feel like? But it doesn't get as much attention.
No, it doesn't get as much attention. However, that is what people really want, right? Like, it's social media is junk food. Long-form conversation is the real thing. It's actual food. It's real food.
But I don't know if that's what people want. It's what's better for them. But I think they want to find people that believe what they believe, follow them, and be like, that's the right way. That's what I see on social media, where it's like, I understand that people are so happy about, some people are really happy about, Elon Musk and what he has done with X and free speech and community notes and all of that. And in a way, I think it's really good too. But we're not having these kinds of conversations unless, like, I don't know if you know Mario Nafal is like moderating a discussion on X, and I don't know if he's even the right person to do that.
I don't know. I haven't listened to any of his discussions, but I see him popping up every now and again. I think I was actually told something interesting by a friend of mine who's, she's kind of on the woke side of things, but she's a very good person. And she said that when Elon took over and made the changes, what actually happened is it's not that we're now having a more kind of in the center balanced conversation. It's that all those people who didn't like what he did left and went to Instagram, and now Instagram is full of political conversations that are to the left of where they used to be on Twitter, which I didn't know, which was actually, it would back up your point. And look, of course, there's nothing people want more than a robot that's going to go, you're absolutely right about everything, right? Like, people love to hear that they're right. And especially, I think, as a woman, you kind of know that with guys, you just have to go, yeah, oh my God, such a good point. And like, they instantly,
melt.
They melt. And at the same time, I think there are a lot of people who are starting to realize the impact it has on them. Like, you open Twitter and you spend a couple of hours on Twitter. How do you feel at the end of that?
I feel horrible.
Right. So ultimately, people do not want to feel horrible at the end of the day. So we have to create things that make people feel better.
What are you planning on creating?
Well, Trigger Media is the idea of creating long-form conversations about various topics that are attempting to be informed and entertaining and funny, and at the same time do not go down the rabbit hole of outrage and whatever. But it's actually a real conversation. I mean, yesterday we recorded the biggest episode in the history of our show with Sam Harris and Eric Weinstein talking about Israel and Palestine over 3.5 hours.
I can't wait to listen to it.
It's going to be incredible. And nobody in that is frothing at the mouth and screaming and shouting. There's disagreement. People have a different view. That's, I think, how you start to address some of this. On the flight in here from Austin, because we spent a few days in Austin, I was being a bit cheap and I didn't want to pay for the Wi-Fi on the plane.
Yeah.
So I was like, let's watch the free TV. And I went and I watched MSNBC and Fox switching every 5 minutes. It's impossible to watch. It's like, if you want to be informed about the world, that is not the way you get informed about the world.
What is the way you get informed about the world?
Well, that is very difficult. It's a very difficult question because so new media is definitely helpful. New media is what we do. However, it also has its pitfalls where it's like you don't really know who to believe exactly,
Yeah.
right? The way I inform myself is I kind of observe over time people who do not pander to their own side. That's how
Yeah, and that's what drew me to your work, because not only did I see you not doing that, also when I got to know you personally, I was like, oh, he's willing to be wrong and curious and all of these things that we've lost as a society.
Yeah, well, curiosity to me is the number one thing. It's why Joe Rogan's the biggest podcast in the world, because he has curiosity at an incredible level. But the way I can kind of tell when somebody is someone who thinks well is when they're not agreeing with their own side on everything and are prepared to challenge their own side. That's when I go, okay, this person's willing to be honest in public. If your opinion is the exact same opinion as everybody on your side, if I can predict your opinion about Israel and Palestine because of, what flag you've got, do you know what I mean?
I know exactly what you mean.
Then you're probably not, doesn't mean you're wrong about everything. You'll probably be right a lot of the time, and you might be funny and creative or whatever, but chances are you're going to be wrong on a lot of stuff because you're not really thinking. You are in a tribe, and the tribe is dragging you in whatever direction you're supposed to go in.
So here's my issue. Why do our tribes have to be political? Why do we have to choose a side? Because I think the best way to come together is through our own humanity. And that's what we've lost.
I don't think we lost that. I don't know that we ever really truly had that. I mean, there was a lot of research on this. Oxytocin, the hormone which binds, it's the hormone a woman releases when she's giving birth, etc. The hormone that binds groups together. It's also the hormone that it causes us to be wary of other groups. We are tribal apes. That's what we are. And the question is, what is the right size and scale of the tribe in order for us to function well? And my worry with Western society is that instead of seeing our country as our tribe, right? Americans, British people, Westerners, whatever that is, it's like, no. We're going to break it down into tiny little groups in America who are supposed to all be fighting each other, who are supposed to all be hating each other.
What are the groups that you see?
Oh, I mean, you can slice it 100 different ways. Men versus women. Whatever moron came up with the idea that the relationship between men and women is a versus, right?
Worse.
That guy, whoever did that needs to be taken off and shot somewhere, right? That is not the nature of the relationship between men and women. Men and women have needed each other to survive and to thrive and to raise children and to reproduce society and to do anything for the entire history of the human race. And without that sacred bond between men and women, nothing happens. We're not even here, right? So whoever wants to define the relationship between, it's like, men versus women, look at what the men are doing, look at what the women, that is the most toxic approach to the whole thing ever. And then you can go down the list, black people versus white people, minorities versus the majority. There's 100 other ways you can define it. LGBT versus, you can go down the list, right?
Yeah. Do you know where I think that came from?
Tell me.
I think the number one thing people need to have in their lives is a sense of belonging. And you hear this word community a lot, right? But if you talk to people about their childhoods, for example, a lot of people will give you a story about a community that they grew up in that rejected them. For example, someone who is gay who felt incredibly ashamed of it because they grew up in a religious organization that said, you can't be gay. Mm-hmm. Or, someone who was any religion who grew up feeling like they couldn't be themselves in whatever capacity. Mm-hmm. And so then as you grow up, you realize, oh, these people didn't accept me. And then the world convinces you that they are your enemy, whether it's men, women, whatever it is. Mm-hmm. And then we start breaking off in those ways.
Here's the thing, though. Trauma is a part of life. Everybody grows up, and at some point early in your childhood, somewhere around 5 or 6, usually something happens, and it can be major, it can be minor, where you go, oh, the world isn't perfect. Because as a child, you think it is, especially if you've been fortunate to have a loving family environment, etc. And then you see your parents argue for the first time, or something else happens. Your dad gets angry, whatever. And then you go, oh, and that moment happens, and you have to adjust, right? So we all go through childhood and then adolescence experiencing some really disturbing, disruptive things to the way that we see, including the type of things that you're talking about. The question is, do you want to be living out your trauma for the rest of your life? Do you want to be living through your trauma? Because have you ever heard the phrase perception is projection?
What does it mean?
So perception is you receiving information. Projection is what you put out there. You're like a projector. You project things onto the wall, right? The way we see the world is not like, oh, I see reality. You project things into the world, and then you experience the consequences of the things that you're putting out there.
Right.
So, for example, if you think all women are bitches, it's going to be your experience that women are bitches to you because you're bringing that energy into the room, and women look at you and go, that guy's a douche. And they treat you as if they are bitches, even though it's not true. If you think all men are pigs, right, you're going to have that experience drive everything that you experience in life, right? And the truth is, some women are bitches and some guys are pigs, but not all on either side. And how you see that is going to determine what your experiences are. And so you have to actually look at reality. The reality is, men and women are all a spectrum of various kinds of behaviors. There are some good people, there's some bad people in every group. And you have to learn to operate from that basis. You have to see reality for what it is. This is what our friend Tom Billy always talks about, right? It's about what works, not what sounds good or not what makes you feel good in your head. And so if you look out into the world and you clean those glasses through which you're looking at things with, you're going to have a better experience of life.
I agree. I mean, you told me that even personally when I've talked to you about my own experiences, where you're like, you're losing your power by seeing stuff that way. I like that a lot. We lose our power when we don't clean the glasses.
And also, I think it's useful to have, I call them useful beliefs. See, not everything you believe is true. And actually, one of the ways to be a happier human being, in my experience, is not to believe everything you think.
Yeah.
Right? Oh, that person hates me. Really? Do they? How do you know?
Yeah, are they having a bad day?
Yeah, are they having a bad day? Whatever. And useful beliefs are beliefs that are helpful but not always true, right? It's useful to believe that you can do anything. However, I think it's pretty clear that at 40 years old and 5'9", I'm never going to play in the NBA. But when I was a kid, it was useful for me to dream of that and to think that I one day could, because it meant that I worked hard at basketball and I learned to work with other people. I learned to work hard. I learned to grind. You see what I'm saying? So one of those things is a useful belief. And a useful belief is, in relation to men and women or making money or whatever, is something that makes you better, makes you more receptive to good things happening to you. Doesn't mean that you're naive and you're running around, everyone's fine, right?
Yeah.
But believing that, the vast majority of the opposite sex are good people with good intentions, in my opinion, is a good strategy. Mm-hmm. That doesn't mean you ignore signals, right? But if your starting position is the person I'm talking to is likely to be a good person, you will much faster get to finding out who they really are. And I learned this from my wife. I used to have a very negative and pessimistic mindset about everything.
Really?
Especially about other people.
What was the mindset? And
very cynical, you can't trust anyone, everyone's out for themselves, blah, 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 blah.
I think I grew up with that too, because everyone around me was always suspicious of each other. Mm-hmm. And also, I don't know if you've heard, in Iranian culture, it's something called chesh, evil eye. Mm-hmm. And you see it in American culture too, where like you sage the room. Have you ever seen that?
You sage the room?
You haven't heard of sage?
Mm-mm.
So
sage the herb?
But you like burn it to get the evil eye and the bad energy out. Or like we Iranians have something called esfand, which you burn, which gets rid of the evil eye too. It's like a really it's a really big thing that people believe in, that people are out to get you. They can't stand to see you happy. Schadenfreude.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's,
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
everywhere.
Yeah.
So what made you change that? Your wife had an impact on you, but what?
Well, what I noticed is that my wife, she thought everyone was wonderful. And it put her in difficulties too, because it was an unrefined worldview. It was like, oh, everyone's being nice to me because they're just really nice. And I was like, no, it's because you're a hot girl. You know, and they want something from you.
Yeah.
So she had to adjust that to understand that some people aren't being nice because they're nice, right? But what I learned was that she gave people a lot of, she had a lot of faith in people. She believed that people are, generally speaking, good. Everyone has something inside of them that is worth exploring, etc. And when she approached people that way, people who had a guard up would lower the guard, and they would become much more amenable to a healthy conversation, a healthy friendship, whatever. And that's really the thing. We're all walking around with that suspicion, but when you show trust in the other person, they will trust you as well, a lot of the time. So, yeah, I think there are useful beliefs about how to treat other people and how you think about other people that change your experience of life, you know. And I think you and I have talked about this a lot, obviously, about the mutual suspicion and resentment between men and women. I think a lot of it comes from the fact that women go online and they see what guys are saying and they go, oh, guys are all like this. And then they take that out into the real world. And therefore, the guys that they experience in the real world are already being seen through that filter, and they end up meeting those expectations. And likewise with guys, they see what women say online, and they go, "Oh, all women, you know, want me."
Are gold diggers, and yeah.
And then when they talk to a girl in real life, and she mentions anything about money, they're like, "Oh, see, I told you."
Yeah.
Right. So everybody's wearing these shit-stained glasses when they're looking at people on the other side. And, you know, you got to clean the glasses. You got to clean the glasses.
Yeah, I totally agree. One thing that I have a serious problem with, going back to what we were saying before, is these political tribes that we've created, because I think they both contribute negatively to what we're talking about. You know what I mean? Like, you know, criticizing modern feminism and it's making people boss babes and blah, blah, blah. And then, you know, resenting women in that way and trying to bring them back to like trad life. You know what I mean? And then women see that on the other side and they're like, oh, the patriarchy, misogyny. All of these words are triggers to people on both sides. And then it creates the men versus women fight. And I don't think it's helpful to look at it that way. And I find that, for example, when I talk to you, I think we're both able to let go of that and talk as humans, but online, no one's able to do that. And I sort of resent these like political conversations that people have. And by the way, they're being had by like, a lot of intellectuals, and then a lot of people with lower IQ, I'd say, are consuming this, and that's their reality now. What these people are saying.
Yeah.
And that's why I watch people like you who I think are really brilliant, and I think to myself, what are you doing in this political world?
That's interesting. I think that, look, we're always going to have a conversation about how we run our society.
Yeah.
Right? And the tribes politically exist because there's a debate about how a society should run, what our values should be, what our policies should be. Should we have a border or not, right? Should we defund the police or not? These are important conversations. And the tribes will always exist, not only because people are tribal, but also because left and right tend to map onto people's psychological profiles. There are things that will make you be in the left-wing tribe. And there are things that will make you be in the right-wing tribe, just that come from just how you see the world, your psychology.
Yeah.
Jonathan Haidt talks a lot about this in...
His book?
Yeah, well, he's written several.
Yeah.
What's the one in which he talks about the different moral values? Not the coddling of the American mind, or is it? Maybe it is. Maybe it is. So the tribes exist because people see the world differently and they have different opinions about how we should run our society. But in terms of me, what I see is as the biggest threat, and which is why I am interested in changing the way we talk about this stuff, is, my book, An Immigrant's Love Letter to the West, is really about the fact that what we have in the West is very important and it's precious. And we do not exist in a vacuum. There are other societies, other cultures, other nations, other superpowers in the world who would love to throw America and the rest of the West off our pedestal. In fact, that is to some extent what they're attempting to do right now. And if we are internally divided, if we're bitching and moaning about each other all the time, if you have this, I know this is a political thing that people shy away from, but wokeness and this woke ideology is incredibly dangerous to the West. I didn't get into talking about it and criticizing it and saying this isn't the way to go because I've got nothing better to do or because I want to be talking about politics. I really don't. I mean, when we started my show 6 years ago, we were two comedians.
Yeah.
That's what we did, right? But I see the undermining of Western confidence, of undermining of Western self-belief as a existential threat to everything that we have here. The average American consumes about 5 times as many resources as the rest of the world. The average person in the rest of the world. That's Western privilege. Of all the privileges that we always talk about, we have Western privilege, and your family knows this too, right? If we do not continue to be strong and confident and be willing to be the greatest nation in the world, we will lose that. And that is going to hurt a lot of people very, very badly. And not just financially, but in every other way. So undermining how we see ourselves, saying we're the worst people ever, we did slavery, we did racism, we did this, we did that. Not untrue, and our history is important to learn properly. But we have to remain convinced that we are good people, that we're good people who are doing good things. Otherwise, why? If you thought your country was bad, why would you defend it?
And why are you here?
Well, that, as you may know, is a very controversial statement.
I haven't said it before.
Why are you here? That's exactly right. If you hate this country, why are you here? And the problem with this woke ideology is that it's infiltrated schools, it's infiltrated colleges, and so generations and generations of young people are being taught that their country is bad. And they're being taught to see their country as bad and not to value what we have here and to take it for granted. That is not a recipe for a good outcome at all. So it's not that I'm political because I like to be team left, team red, or team blue, or whatever. I really don't. I think both tribes are really dumb and say really dumb things all the time. And they're both right about some things. And that creative tension between the two of them is what's necessary. What's happened in the last 20 years, well, it's happened in the last many years, but particularly since social media became big, is one side has just run away with the ball. Right? They've got the ball and they're hogging it and no one else is getting it.
Who has it?
It's the progressive left. They have a massively disproportionate impact on how we see ourselves.
Because
social media rewards ideas that sound good but don't work, and punishes ideas that work but sound bad.
The other thing, the distinction that you brought up to me over the phone once was you said, and I know you denounce both when they're saying something you don't believe in, but you said something like conservatives think they can just get up and make a speech and that the whole world will listen to them, and the left makes good movies and infiltrates culture, and that's part of the reason they have more of an impact.
Well, right, there's this, I can't remember what the exact words of the meme are, but the Republicans just want to grill,
Yeah,
Right.
but also you got really big because of a speech that you made.
I did. And I'm not a conservative.
I know.
So, but I think the thing with conservatives, they tend to focus on practical things, doing something small at the local level, whatever, which is great. You need people like that in society. People are just going to, run the factory, whatever, right? They're really important. But in terms of the cultural conversation, it's like we all swim in this soup that is cooked for us by the people in this area, the Hollywood, right? And the picture they present to you of the world, I'll give you this example will maybe make it clearer. I've been to the US now 7 or 8 times. Before I came here, I had all sorts of ideas about what people in the American South are like, what people in New York are like, what people in LA are like, what people here, what people there. And it's all BS. It's all completely not the experience that I actually have when I come here. But the reason I'm so confident being like, oh, Americans are like this, is because we all watch your movies, we all listen to your music, we all consume American culture. And who controls American culture? What's mostly people on the left side of the political spectrum. And so when they're making movies that paint America in a particular light, or paint Republicans or Democrats or whoever in a particular light, the rest of the world and most people who haven't traveled to every state. I mean, how many Americans have been to every state in the US? Probably not a lot, right?
Yeah.
So how do you then know, if you've never been to California, how do you know what California is like? By watching cultural content. If you've never been to New York, how do you know what New York is like? By watching cultural content. So the people who make that content are the people who are shaping your reality, right? So this is the point that I always make, is like part of the pushback and getting us to a balanced conversation is making comedy, entertainment, culture that offers a different view on the world, that offers a balanced view on the world. Like we just interviewed comedian Neil Brennan.
Oh yeah, I know him.
And he had his last special is called Blocks, and in it he makes fun of both sides, and that's how it should be. That's how it should be, because neither the Republicans or the Democrats have all the answers.
Oh, I totally agree. And that's why I do think comedians are so crucial to all of this, because they point out all the absurdities of everything. I guess the right comedians.
The right comedian.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And humor is a very powerful tool. I mean, Francis and I always talk about this with what we do, like when we're interviewing people. Even though I don't do stand-up anymore, I write a lot of satirical stuff and whatever. Yeah. We always crack jokes to diffuse the tension, but also it's kind of like the sugar that makes the medicine go down, as we say.
Yeah, so comedy.
Yeah, well, comedy is awesome. It's entertainment, but it also is a way to open people's minds, And that's actually how I started being aware of the stuff that was going on, because to me, the funniest comedy is when I disagree with what the person is saying and I'm laughing anyway. It's when they're basically making fun of me. Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
That to me is the funniest.
Yes.
But over recent years, a lot of comedy, less so in the US. In the US, you have lots of great comics who are doing this. But in Britain, it's mostly people just going, look at the other side, they're all dumb.
Which is not helpful. Or funny.
Or funny.
Yeah.
Most importantly, comedy doesn't always have to be helpful, but it should be funny.
What do you guys think of Ricky Gervais? Because when he made that Golden Globe speech over here, I was dying.
Yeah. He's amazing. He's amazing in the fact that, him and a few other people are really important because they're too big to cancel. You can't cancel Ricky Gervais.
You can't cancel someone who's too big to cancel or too rich.
Yeah.
I think once you get to a certain level of wealth and enough people respect you, you're free to be more courageous. And that bothers me too, because I think there are some really smart people with incredible things to say that don't say them because of this whole, you're going to get canceled. And I don't like when people say that cancel culture isn't a real thing. I've seen it a million times. I've experienced it myself.
Yeah. And it completely is true. I'm hopeful that, it's not true of everybody, and particularly at the lower levels, people who aren't big, who haven't got a big audience, whatever. It is still there and it's still dangerous to them. But I sort of feel like we've maybe got to a point where it's becoming counterproductive to cancel people. And this is what I said from day one. The way to end cancel culture is to support the people who get canceled, and to make sure that if you come after somebody and try and cancel them, all that's going to do is make them bigger and stronger.
Yeah, I have a question. Okay, to get controversial.
Okay.
Okay, so the Israel-Palestine stuff.
Okay.
Did you see what Mia Khalifa tweeted, and then
I did.
what happened with Playboy?
So they refuse to work with her now.
Yeah, they removed her from the network.
Yeah.
She's done.
Yeah.
And then there was also a response, I'm Jewish, and I know I'm biased. This guy, Bill Ackman, there was an organization at Harvard, or some students on Harvard signed a letter that was highly offensive to the situation that happened in Israel, the Hamas attack. And he's like, I want to know who they are, so I never hire them. And then a bunch of CEOs came on and was like, yeah, release their names. And then apparently there was like a truck that drove around and put their names all over at Harvard. What do you think of that?
So the distinction that I've always made when it comes to speech, right, is that there's a difference between freedom of speech and the freedom to incite or support or celebrate violence. These are different things, right? So, for example, in the UK, Hamas is what we call a proscribed terrorist organization. That means it is illegal to support them. It is illegal to make public statements of support in favor of them. It is illegal to give them money. It's illegal to celebrate their attack, essentially, right? In the US, I don't think that's the case. You have a First Amendment, which means you absolutely have the right to say whatever the hell you think. So, to me, there is a difference between incitement to violence and the support of violence, and people who celebrate mass murder. Do you want those people working at your company?
I don't.
No, I don't think anybody does. But equally, people have a right to express their opinion.
Here's my thing.
Yeah.
And I stand with Israel, as you know. I look at those people just, taking a step back, and they think they're defending, innocent children and civilians on the other side. So what do we have to say there? That's the thing that's so confusing here with the Israel-Palestine conflict in particular, but it represents a lot of conflicts that we have anyway.
No, see, that's a category error because, and this is what these people often do, is there's a difference between saying Palestinians are oppressed by Israelis or being badly treated by Israelis or whatever, and celebrating the murder of innocent people.
Yeah.
These are completely different issues, right? So this is one of the things that has happened in the modern world, or maybe it was always like this, I suppose, is people feel entitled to apply rules to other people that they do not apply to themselves, right? So people feel entitled to do terrible things to other people because they disagree with those people. And my thing is, why don't we all just agree on a set of rules by which we play, irrespective of who's on your team and who isn't? It's like you couldn't have a game of American football if the two teams didn't agree what the rules were. Like if the quarterback could get a gun out and shoot somebody, that wouldn't work, right? And so when we talk about all these contentious issues, we have to agree a kind of code of conduct. And one of them to me is you attack what people say, you don't attack them. You don't try to discredit people, you don't try to cancel them. I mean, I'm not going to watch any more Mia Khalifa videos.
I don't think you ever did you?
No, she's not my type. But you see what I'm saying, right? Like, people are free to see what she said and go, okay, that's not a good person. Or that's a person who's not behaving in a good way, and I'm therefore going to act accordingly.
Right.
But should there be a boycott to take her content down from every platform? In my opinion, no. She's allowed to express her opinion. Her opinion is fucking horrible, and people can make their own decisions as a result of that. And in terms of hiring and not hiring people, again, it depends on what people have said. Did they, celebrate the attack, or did they just say, I stand with Palestine, which people are, of course, allowed to do? These are difficult things to unravel, but people like to collapse them into one conversation because it makes it easier to make a political point. But there's a difference, fundamentally, the point I'm making, Nicole, is there's a difference between celebrating or inciting violence and having the wrong opinion.
I'm with you there. Do you think it would be fair to say that we're living in an increasingly intolerant society? Because that's what I think I'm seeing. For example, I see the narrative on both sides. And something that I've noticed is that we're looking at different maps. We're reading different history books. Mm-hmm. Straight up, the textbooks say different things.
Yeah.
And when it's that way, we're never going to agree on the truth. So how do you make progress there? Like, even when I'm thinking, you just had, an interview with Eric and Sam Harris, and I think I know where both of them stand and where you stand here. Is there another side that we're missing?
Well, I don't know where I stand exactly. I think, they didn't entirely agree either.
Okay.
The other side that we're missing, you mean the pro-Palestine view?
Not just the pro-Palestine view, but their entire historical account of that land belongs to them.
Yeah. No, I'm someone who... We released a clip of an interview we did with a British Jewish journalist called Melanie Phillips, in which I actually challenge her on what she's saying.
Yeah.
And I'm not entirely convinced by what she's saying. If you watch that clip, you can kind of tell. I'm going, hold on, but what about this?
Yeah.
So I'm fully aware that there are different aspects to this situation. And it's not as simple as people like to... Sorry, it's not as simple as people like to make it out to be. It's not a thing you can get a clear read on in 5 minutes, as some people are. Hey, just watch this video. It's not like that. However, we are in the current situation in which ultimately somebody at some point is going to have to accept that we are in the present day, and we have to start sorting the situation that we have in the present day. The history of it, look, the Palestinians, well, it's not Palestinians because they didn't really exist until a few decades ago, but the Arab nations around feel that this is Arab land, which Israel is occupied, and the Israelis feel that it's their land and that they're being killed and attacked for being in the Jewish state, right? That is not a thing that is going to... It's not like someone is going to come out and read a book and go, actually, here's the truth, and everyone's going to agree. Because the reality on the ground is there's millions of people living there who are not going to move, okay? So the history of it is actually not that relevant.
I agree with you.
It's about how do you move forward from the situation you currently have. And that is very, very difficult. I certainly don't have an answer to how to do that.
I don't either.
If I did, that would be very worrying.
Yeah. Well, after having the conversation with Melanie and with Eric Weinstein and Sam Harris, has anything changed in your mind about this issue at all?
The truth is, I can't say in public what the truth is.
Because?
Because it's too controversial. But the reality is that a conflict of this kind is not going to be resolved without a physical separation between the two sides.
Fair. And you don't have to say the controversial thing.
Yeah.
But what makes you hesitate in terms of saying it? Because if anything, I've heard you in several interviews say the controversial thing, yet you won't say it here.
Okay. This is going to take a little while, okay? I said this in our conversation with Sam and Eric, but I mostly wanted them to talk, so let me explain it like this. The United States dropped 2 nuclear bombs on Japan, okay? Killing civilians in the most horrific ways possible. after one of the bombs was dropped, a crew of, I think, U.S. Army engineers or some American experts, they went through the place where the bomb dropped and they measured the blast impact of those weapons, okay? Not the energy released from the nuclear bomb. You know, they say it's this many megatons or whatever, but the actual blast, the destructive impact. And they calculated how many conventional munitions, normal bombs, you'd have to drop to cause that same amount of blast impact. In the last year and a half of World War II, the Allies dropped 50 Hiroshimas a month on Germany. 50 Hiroshimas a month. The Soviets and the Americans and the British flattened Germany. They flattened German city after German city after German city. Hundreds of thousands of innocent German civilians burnt in bomb shelters and in their homes and whatever. And the reason the Allies did that, I mean, some people argue it's, indefensible and whatever, but the reason the Allies did that is that the people who ran Germany, Hitler and his gang, decided that they wanted to make a final stand. It was a death cult. They didn't want to spare their own civilians. They said, we're going to stand to the last man and we're going to defend every German city. And World War II was lost in 1941 at the Battle of Moscow. Right, when the Germans ran out of steam and didn't take Moscow, from that moment on, it was very clear that the Germans were going to lose. When the Americans did the D-Day landings, and the Canadians and a few others, the war was over. Everybody knew it was over. But the people who ran Germany didn't want it to be over. They decided to make a stand. And because of that, the Allies ended up killing millions of innocent people. Okay? I don't want a single innocent person to die. But this is war. And in war, innocent people die.
Always.
Always. So we are not willing to have an honest conversation about that because it's a horrific conversation, which is how many innocent civilians are we prepared to kill to eliminate Hamas? We're not willing to have that conversation, at least not publicly, because nobody wants to be the guy who's like, yeah, I think we should kill no more than 500,000 people. I don't want to have that conversation. It's not how I think about it. I think it's a terrible tragedy what's happening. But the problem is that I know exactly the right thing to say on Twitter. The terrible tragedy committed by Hamas in Israel just shows the cycle of violence in the Middle East. And until we all come together and learn to love each other as people, no progress will ever be made. 40,000 likes. But that's not the case. That's not true. That's not the truth.
But Konstantin, even more likes if you take a stand with one side.
Yeah. From the river to the sea or whatever, bomb Gaza. Those are going to get likes too. But none of those perspectives are true. None of them, right? And given that you have a terrorist organization like Hamas, which deliberately places their military facilities underneath hospitals, inside schools. They're preventing civilians from leaving the area, even though Israelis are saying, please leave, we have to take out Hamas. So the bottom line is to what I'm saying is a lot of innocent people are going to die. And I am not comfortable being like, yeah, and that's fine. But it is what's going to happen. It is what happens in war. And so, historically, how do you stop two tribes that hate each other from fighting? You find a way that there's a physical border between them that makes geographical sense. You reinforce that border, and you just try and preserve peace between those two countries, those two nation states. We don't have that situation at the moment. And one of the reasons we don't have it, by the way, is that the Arab countries, which talk so much about how supportive they are of Palestine, they won't take a single Palestinian refugee anymore.
Egypt hasn't?
Well, Egypt did what Trump said America should do. They built a wall.
Yeah.
So people say, well, Gaza is an open-air prison, and maybe, but one of the reasons is that the entire southern border of the Gaza Strip is closed off by Egypt. So But look, ultimately, the point I'm trying to make is this isn't going to get solved on a podcast. And the controversial thing is that a lot of civilians are going to die. I don't want them to.
I don't either.
I know you don't, and none of us do, but they will. Because if you're Israel, you can't have the thing that happened happen again. America went after Al-Qaeda after 9/11, had to be done. Even though, the war in Iraq was an abomination, but dealing with Al-Qaeda, that had to be done. Taking out bin Laden had to be done. You have to kill the people who want to kill you. You have to. So it's a bloody and messy conflict that there is no easy solution to. That's the controversial, unsayable thing.
And the ultimate conclusion that you reached?
The ultimate conclusion, I think, is that Israel is going to do what Israel is doing because they have to, and that is going to be really bad for everybody, including for Israel. And both Israel and Israel's allies and Israel's enemies, they're all locked in it's bad choice after bad choice after bad choice. There are no good choices here.
No, and then on a macro level, you have one side claiming this is causing Islamophobia, and the other side claiming, and this is causing extreme anti-Semitism, and we're seeing it everywhere.
Well, Noel MacDonald had this brilliant joke. He said, imagine if ISIS got hold of a nuclear weapon and killed 50 million Americans. Just imagine how many innocent Muslims would suffer from Islamophobia.
Yeah.
Sometimes we kind of focus on the wrong thing. But you're right. The Western countries, and you see this if you see videos from London now, we have imported this conflict from the Middle East because the people that we have welcomed to our shores have not bought into the idea of the West. They have not bought into the idea that you become an American first, you become a British person first. People have these very strong attachments to the places from which they came, and they think that, that is what matters more than being here and living according to the values of this place.
It sounds like we have identity issues.
Yeah. Well,
not just with that, but going back to our last conversation, identifying more with being, for example, gay or black or any of these things before we identify with, I think, forget just American, that's important too, but just with I am a human being. I belong to the human race. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
That's how I see it.
Yeah, completely. And this is, coming back to the conversation we had about woke culture, this is what it encourages. It encourages people to retreat into the narrowest sliver of their identity instead of seeing the big picture.
Yeah, one thing I liked about the speech that you gave at Oxford, which you received a standing ovation for, which I think we haven't.
Didn't.
You did, no?
No.
I thought that was the headline.
It wasn't a standing ovation, no.
It was just people clapping?
Yeah.
And that was because that was in some of the headlines when I read about it. It was something.
Well, it tells you about the authenticity of the media then.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, because they're like, this is the first time someone went into one of these institutions, talked about woke culture, and it was well received.
Yeah.
That was the message that we got.
Yeah. It was well received, yeah, for sure, but I didn't get a standing ovation.
But it wasn't a standing
No,
ovation.
No.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. So it was well received, but it was one of the first times we've seen that at a university.
Yeah.
And so, you went on all these different outlets talking about it. When I watched it, I was like, what's different about the way he's communicating about this topic than the way other people are communicating about this topic? And the one thing that I noticed that was different about you is that you were not talking to the other side like they were idiots. I think that distinction made all the difference. You even began by saying, I know you're rational people.
Some
right?
of you.
Some of you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, even the humor.
I made fun of
Yeah,
it.
but even the humor of it brought levity to the topic, which I don't think many people are able to do. So I also see here a communication issue, which politicians can't solve because they're so married to their views, and you're somewhere in the middle.
Yeah.
Where you're like, I can see where it's going wrong here.
Politicians also can't solve it because they have to pander to their base.
They have to.
So politicians don't have the luxury that I do of being perfectly happy to alienate portions of the people who are my quote unquote my audience frequently. They can't do that because then they're going to get voted out. But yeah, the answer to people who have ideas you disagree with is to try and persuade them that there's a better way to look at the world. It's like you and I talk. And if you say something and I don't agree, I'll try and offer you what I think is a more useful perspective. And if you don't think I'm criticizing you or saying you're an idiot, it's going to be a lot easier for you to hear. Likewise with you, right? You'll say, well, have you thought about this? Or, for me, this is how this came across and blah, blah, blah. And then it's easier for me to receive. But what happens particularly online is people aren't actually trying to persuade each other.
What are they trying to do?
They're trying to get clicks from their base.
Yeah.
That's what's happening. So it's not about persuading the other side. It's about dunking on the other side, because it's a spectator sport, right? It's a sport. You want your team to win, and when your quarterback throws a nice pass, that's what you like. And when when a tackle crashes into somebody and takes them out, that's what you want to see. Boom.
Which is why, if you look at the YouTube videos with some of the most clips, and I've even seen your name with these kinds of titles. Ben Shapiro destroys blah, blah, blah. Bill Maher destroys blah, blah, blah. And that's what people want to see. So it's not just politicians, exactly what you're saying, it's the media too.
Yeah.
So I think there needs to be a complete shift in what people are paying attention to, and there needs to be a lot of us who do that. So like I like what you're saying with trigger media. You know what I mean? Like I don't think that you have any interest in making someone be more political, more conservative, more liberal by any means. You're just like, here's a better perspective of the world. Here's a different perspective of the world. Here's what might be more helpful. And I think if we all think like that instead of politically, then we win.
I agree. I think it's a little bit more complex than that.
Okay.
I mean, I agree with that, definitely. But it's a little bit more complex than that because we're not starting from a blank slate. We are in a position where a lot of dangerous narratives are already out there that do have to be countered. Maybe not destroyed, but certainly countered, right? So, for example, when people post a clip of me, Konstantin Kisin destroys the BBC with facts and logic, it's because the BBC is pushing a narrative that does have to be challenged robustly, right?
Yeah.
And when I go and do a TV interview and it's a 7-minute interview and they're trying to impose a whole set of crazy ideas, I don't have the time like this or the good faith like this to be like, well, have you thought about it like that? Because that's not what that game is about. So when I go on TV and it's a 7-minute or a 3-minute hit, I'm going to go in there and I'm going to go, this is your argument, this is why it's ridiculous. And I'm going to make you look dumb. Because
and you have to make the title, when you release that, you have to change the title in your own favor too.
Yeah. Well, you have to, right?
You have to.
But because that is that game. What I'm saying is we can play a better game, the one we're playing now, which is communication, connection, mutual understanding, mutual enrichment, etc. That's a more interesting game. But to the extent that that game exists, that game also has to be played, because a lot of people will watch that and go, oh, okay, I didn't realize why that argument didn't make sense, but now I do. You know, when we just interviewed Tom Bilyeu from Impact Theory, and he was talking about how he's not on the left, on the right, but he thinks that creative tension between those two is what you need.
I heard him say that too.
And I hadn't realized that is why we started trigonometry 6 years ago. In this entire time, nobody had said it like that. And I kept looking for a word. It's like, am I a centrist? Well, I'm not, because on a lot of things, I'm either quite to the left or quite to the right, politically, on a lot of my views. Am I a moderate? Well, I don't think I am a moderate because I feel strongly about certain things, and I'm not like in the middle. I think I'm very like pro legalizing weed and psychedelics, for example, right? That's a very like left progressive type of idea. But I also think we need a border. And some people tell me that's racist now or whatever. You know what I mean? So am I moderate? I don't know that I am. And actually what I realized is I'm just someone who thinks that both sides have good ideas and both sides have terrible ideas, and we need to take the good ones and use them and to reject the bad ones. And that's what Tom was really saying. Let's go with what works.
Yeah, let's go with what works.
Yeah.
I want to get into your personal life for a little bit because I know people are curious about it, and I know very little about it. But let's go back to how you met your wife.
Okay. How long have you got? We got time?
We've got time.
So this is why I'm a bit of a romantic, and while not necessarily being religious, I believe in I believe in destiny. I don't believe that your choices are entirely predetermined, but it's like you have a spectrum of options from which you can choose, but it's only narrow, broadly speaking. Now, over decades, you can take yourself in a completely different direction, right? If you just sit at home and play computer games, you are going to take yourself in a particular direction, no matter what your destiny is. So I was 18 years old at school, boarding school in the UK. And my parents live in Armenia. And I'd flown to Armenia, and on the last day of my time with my family, they were like, okay, let's go to our friend's dinner party. Okay. And there was, in Armenia, they have these women like coffee bean readers. I don't know if you have this in Iran.
Yeah, we do.
So for people who don't know, you take like Turkish coffee. Is that what you call it here, Turkish coffee?
Yeah, and then you turn it around.
Yeah, there's the sediment in the bottom of the cup.
Yes.
You put that onto a napkin, and then
you read it. Yeah, it's like a psychic thing. Like,
a wise old woman looks at it and goes, "Oh, here's what I see." So just so you understand the context, I'm 18 years old. I'm about to go to university, college. And you know how college is, like everyone's, kind of having fun, whatever. And at school, I hadn't really had like a serious girlfriend up to this point at all.
Had you had fun?
Not in that way.
Okay.
Yeah. So we go to this place, and I'm like this super arrogant, cocky 18-year-old dickhead.
I can imagine that.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's not that hard to imagine. I'm not that different now. And I'm like, oh. And I'm like hardcore atheist. I've read my Richard Dawkins, all that.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, coffee bean. Yeah, sure. Coffee bean read. Yeah, I'm sure this is, go on, fine. Do it with me. And she's like, okay. So I drink the coffee. I tip the thing in. She looks at it, goes, I see in your future a very serious woman. And I'm like, what the hell are you talking about? I'm 18 years old. I've never had a serious girlfriend. I'm about to go to university. What serious woman? What on earth are you talking about? And she's like, I see in your future a very serious woman. Oh, okay. And I instantly dismiss it. Forgot all about it. And I go home, and I had a 3 a.m. flight, because to fly west from Armenia, you have to leave early. So 3 a.m. flight. So no point going to bed. So I stay up, and there used to be this program, which you probably wouldn't know, called ICQ. It was kind of like MSN Messenger. Mm-hmm. This is before Facebook, before any social media, before Skype, before anything. And I had this program installed on my computer because I used to play a computer game where it was helpful. And I was like, well, I've got a couple of hours. My family's gone to bed. I've got nothing to do. Let's find someone to talk to. And, being 18 years old, obviously, if it's a girl, that's a benefit, right?
Yeah.
Don't want to talk to another guy. That's weird. So I was looking through the list of like people who were there. I can't remember how the search function worked. And all the girls were like, I like parties. I like this. I like shopping. I like parties. I like shopping. I like discos. I like parties. I like shopping. And then there was this one girl who was like, I like philosophy and history and politics. I was like, let's talk to you. So I said hello. And we talked for an hour, just chat, like text. And then I went and got my flight, arrived, wrote her an email. She wrote back. I wrote back. She wrote back. Then called her. She called me. And we wrote emails for about a year before we saw a photo, before we...
Even a photo.
Yeah. It was months before we sent each other photos, yeah.
It's almost like Love is Blind.
Not blind.
I mean, that you haven't seen each other in that in that respect.
We were very lucky that we got to know each other as human beings before we got to know each other as physical beings. Yeah. And after a few weeks of writing emails, we pretty much knew we were going to get married.
You didn't care what she looked like?
After the photo. I mean, look, it wasn't like that. It wasn't like I went, oh, you're hot. Okay, cool, let's do it. It was more like I already knew how I felt about her. And then it was like, okay, and, we're on each other's level physically. Great.
Right. I think this story is so interesting to me because the way that most of us filter now, it strictly looks and what does this person do? Can they afford the lifestyle I want? Things like that. So what you're saying is so different from that.
And it's the benefit of youth because, my wife, she's not working now. She's with our son. She absolutely loves it, even though she was obsessed with her career before. And when we first got together, we got married by the time we were 20. So 2 years out from those emails, we were already married. And we were living in different countries at the time. So we got together, lived together, got married within 2 years after that.
And you never look back and think, oh, I wish I had more fun, or oh, I wish I did this.
No, I had great fun with my wife. This is the bit that no one tells you. Life isn't all about having fun.
Yeah. What is it about then?
It's about building the life you want. That's what we spend the people who spend their 20s having fun, we spend our 20s working out how to be together, working out all the shit that was causing tension and conflict and whatever, so that we can have a great life now where, when you get to the stage that we're at now where you have young children and elderly parents and there's lots of other stuff going on, it's a stressful time. And you get really tested. And I'm someone who's always had a bit of a temper, and my wife is, every human being has their own flaws, right? These are things that have to be negotiated over time and worked out, and your money worries and your money attitudes, and how do you relate to each other, and how do you have a healthy relationship, and what are the books you read in order to understand the other person, and all of that. We've had 20 years to do that. I didn't sleep with lots of random women, it's true. Do I feel like I missed out on that? No.
Why do you think that's such a, you see people like Andrew Tate and do you know who Dan Bilzerian is?
No.
Another popular figure in LA who's just constantly seen on yachts with tons of, women in bikinis and goes viral all the time. And a lot of men look at other men who are like that and hold them in a very high regard in terms of this is what masculinity is. And this is what success is. But what you're saying is something very different than that.
Most of them didn't have dads.
How do you know that?
They talk about it.
Do they?
Yeah.
But then
the divorce rate and single parenthood has gone, I don't have the exact numbers, but it also varies by demographic. There are some communities where it really hasn't changed that much. In some communities, the single, the number of boys growing up without a dad is like 75%, 80%.
Did you have a good dad?
No. My dad is a very interesting, super erudite, super early successful. He was a millionaire by the time he was 30, bankrupt by the time he was 35. He was a senior minister in the Boris Yeltsin government in Russia, incredibly knowledgeable, etc. But he was he was very focused on himself because they had me very young, and my parents My mum had been 18 for 4 days when I was born, and my dad was 20. Yeah, I was an accident, as you can imagine. So they were very young and didn't really know what they were doing. But my dad grew up without a dad. And the difference between the two of us is night and day. I didn't have a great dad, but I had a dad, and it made all the difference. It made all the difference. Being a man is not something you pick up from the ether. You have to see it. You have to watch it. You have to see your dad get up and go to work every morning. You have to see your parents working things out or not. You know, my parents, I always joke that my parents, finally after 40 years together, my parents finally formalized how they feel about each other and got divorced or separated or whatever. Like, they didn't have a healthy marriage. But I looked at that and I was like, well, that's not how I want to live. I don't want to treat my wife the way my dad treats my mom.
It's also interesting that you looked at that, and instead of thinking, well, marriage doesn't work, you thought, no, I'm going to do marriage this way, the right way.
Well, I'm like in the top 1 percentile for disagreeableness. So whenever I look at other people doing stuff, I'm just like, well, that's dumb. Why would I do that?
Yeah.
You know, and, you know, as you go through life, you meet people who have a different experience of all those things, of marriage, of life together, of, you know, raising children, parents, etc. So I try not to draw too many conclusions from individual traumatic experiences. We talked about it earlier. Just because, you know, my parents didn't have a particularly happy marriage, it doesn't mean that that isn't available. It just means that I ought not to do the things that they did.
Did you have examples of people that did have happy marriages where you're like, I aspire to be like that?
Yeah.
And then...
Yeah, my mother's parents, so my grandparents on my mother's side.
So what'd you learn from them?
What I learned from them is that love is everything. You're going to make me cry here.
That's what I do here.
That love is everything, and kindness can overcome many things, and it's important not to take yourself too seriously, and that most of all that kind of relationship where they, you know, I remember my grandparents before he died. My grandmother's still alive. She's 95, lives in Ukraine. I'd go and visit them, and, you know, they would have been together for 60 years by that point. They'd walk hand in hand. You know, it's how they were. And just knowing that was available meant that I was completely immune to all the negative examples and looking at them and going, oh, well, it's not possible. You know, all marriages are like this. You know, and the other thing with my parents, you know, I almost had it even tougher, I would say, because when people have a bad experience, they want the world to justify it. And so they will say, well, this is what marriage is like. Or, you know, well, yeah, you know, when you've been married 20 years, this is what your marriage will be like. I remember my dad literally saying this to me. And I remember thinking, no, I fucking won't. Fuck you for trying to get this into my head. And I have a great relationship with my dad. I love my dad. And as I grow older, I need my dad more than ever. Like right now, when I'm building a business and doing lots of interesting things, I speak to him all the time and get really great advice from him. But he wasn't a perfect person. He was a young man back then. He didn't know what the hell he was talking about.
I think that's an important thing for us to realize, is that our parents are growing up as they raise us too.
Totally. So my next book is going to be about gratitude, and it is going to be told through me forgiving my dad.
I love that.
Yeah. Negative examples don't have to determine how you see the world. You have to seek out the examples you want and then go, what is this person doing that the people in the negative example were not doing? And that's how you build a happy relationship or a successful business. You know this. You know.
I know this. I think something that I've realized as I've been reading more and more and listening to more and more podcasts, experts, etc., I think it's really important for us to define words accurately. Okay? So, for example, obviously, if you define the word masculinity in a certain way, and people look up to that definition, and that's the definition that they accept, maybe they'll be led in a wrong direction. Or the word love. Like, how would you are in what I'd say, and you've said, a happy, fruitful marriage that teaches you a lot. How do you define love? Or what you get from it, or what you learn from it? And that includes the love you have for your son and what you get from being a father. Because that definition by now should have changed so many times because of the roles that you have.
Love is not a word that you can define.
Interesting, because Bell Hooks defines it.
Okay, let me rephrase. Love is not a word that I can define. It's you either know it or you don't. You know, you feel it or you don't. It's an experience.
It's an experience, but I don't know. I do feel like it's important to define it, only because I think there have been so many times, like, for example, people who stay in these toxic, addictive relationships and they think that's love, but it's not. You know what I mean? Like you said, love is something you feel, but the feeling must be distinguished between, like, lust, for example, or addiction, another example. That's why I think it's important to define it. So it's like,
I'm not arguing with the idea.
I'm only asking you, because if I have someone in front of me who's telling me their marriage is good and their love is great and their life is great, then maybe their definition can be helpful to someone else.
I don't think it's about that. I think.
Okay, here's another question.
Yeah.
What is it about your relationship with your wife and as a father that if you didn't have it, you would be completely different? And that you'd see the world in a completely different way? What is it about your marriage that you love so much and shapes you as a man?
That my wife is incredibly different to me. She's like the polar opposite to me in every way.
How?
I am hard, she's soft. I am aggressive, she's gentle. I am intellectual, she's spiritual. I am... I want to provide, she wants to care and nurture. These are different things, right? There's a difference between bringing home a bag of money and, like, wanting to feed people or look after them or be nice to them or think of them or whatever. She's much more open-minded than I am, which means that she's brought a lot of interesting books and experiences into our relationship. Like John Gray, I don't know if you're familiar. I think you and I have talked.
Are you kidding? You've given me so many recommendations to read his stuff.
Yeah.
And I have.
Yeah, you have.
Yeah.
So John Gray, I mean, look, you talk about, like, toxic relationships. There definitely would have been a point in our relationship where somebody looking from the outside would have said, oh, that's a toxic relationship. But we knew that we were meant to be together. And if we're meant to be together, that means, if it's a toxic relationship, what does that mean? That means we have to find a way to change.
To make it not toxic, yeah.
Right. And that's what we did. By doing personal development, reading books. John Gray's, like, incredible for that. Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus. He has an update for it as well. So, first and foremost, a relationship is something that's supposed to force you to get better. A lot of people, I think, now are like, well, this is how I am, so I need to find someone who's like the right match. I don't think it works that way. I think what you're supposed to do is find somebody with whom you want to grow together and overcome whatever tensions you have. Because every relationship is going to have tension. Every relationship is going to have disagreement. Everyone's going to fight at some point. Everyone's going to bitch and argue and do things that they're not proud of. Both man and woman, right? Everybody's going to do that. The question is your commitment to each other strong enough that you're going to work through all that? And if it is from both sides, then you found the right person. Because if you work on your relationship, you will always get it to a point where it is happy and good, if both sides are prepared to work on it.
And that you get a better version of yourself.
100. Or I wouldn't be a tenth of the man I am if it weren't for my wife. A tenth.
I get that when I talk to you.
A tenth.
Because when you describe yourself when you were younger, it's always like douchebag, arrogant, blah, blah, blah.
Douchebag, no, but arrogant and...
Okay, yeah, maybe not that word.
Yeah.
But, whatever.
Arrogant. And also that arrogance was an attempt to cover up for a lack of confidence. That's what arrogance usually is. People who are arrogant are only arrogant because they're not confident.
100%. So how did you overcome that? What advice would you give to someone who expresses themselves in an arrogant way, or who just feels insecure? How do you develop your own self-esteem, whether it is a man or a woman? How do you develop that?
I think that almost all true confidence comes from seeing the result of the things that you're doing. In other words, I don't think you can fake confidence or think your way into confidence. The reason I'm confident talking to you is that I've built a giant YouTube channel from nothing. From having no money, no connections, no social media profile, nothing. We started it in a room above a comedy club. And now we have, if you put together the podcast and YouTube, over 1 million subscribers. We're about to launch a whole new thing. We have 14 people working for us that I'm managing, the people that I have conversations with. Like, I have proven to myself that I am right to be confident about me.
But before you even got there...
I didn't have confidence.
What did you have that got you to start?
Ambition.
Ambition.
Yeah.
Okay,
and
that's
drive.
the word.
Ambition and drive.
Right.
I wanted more than what I had, and I wanted to prove to myself and to the world that I'm worthy of that.
I think I have the same experience.
Yeah. So I don't believe that you can think your way into confidence. I think you prove to yourself by doing, by achieving, by creating, by building, that you merit that confidence. So, and confidence without that is delusion. If you're confident without having any evidence that you're right to be, that a lot of the people you meet like that, I'm just like, you're delusional.
You know what's interesting, and I've talked to you about this, and I'm not sure I've sent you the videos, but I told you it's very popular. This whole thing of manifestation and promoting having delusion and stuff like that so that you can get ahead. It is a very popular thing that's happening. What do you think of it?
I think it can be used very well.
Yeah.
Which is, I think one of the things that people sometimes don't realize is to what extent they're limited by their own worldview. Like for me, coming to America, every time I come back, my vision gets 10 times bigger. Because here, everything is bigger. There's more room for your eye. Just like we're sitting in a building now where you look over, the Hollywood studios out of the window from a high rise.
We're literally in a STX is a movie production company.
Right. Like when you look out at that, your perspective for what's possible changes. And a lot of people learn to see the possibilities for themselves to be very small. I always had that arrogance to some extent was not unhelpful because I always knew that I was in many ways it was actually really until a couple of years ago, I was very, I was not that happy a human being because I was constantly somewhere else. I wasn't present because I was, from a young age, very young age, I had this belief. It wasn't a belief, I just knew that I was supposed to do something special. And I wasn't doing it for most of my adult life. So that tension was like, well, I'm supposed to be, but I'm not there. Therefore, I have to think about this. How do I strategize? And I was never actually present in the moment, So you have to have, you have to be able to believe that bigger things are possible for you than what you have now. I've lost my train of thought a little bit, Nicole.
Well, I was talking about manifestation, and I was like, what do you think of that?
So yes.
So in some ways, it's helpful.
The idea that things can happen that don't make any logical sense for you is a very helpful tool.
I think for me with the marriage thing, I have to think that, otherwise I'm hopeless. And not just me. I mean, I've talked with you about this, like all men and women who want to find their match.
Yeah.
You kind of see it as like a miracle.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if it's a miracle. I just think you have to see it as something as possible that's available.
I'm just saying that you feel like, I don't know, I look at a lot of marriages and I don't think a lot of them are happy.
Mm-hmm.
But then I talk to some people like you who are just like, this changed my life, and this person changed my life, and the hope is reinstilled. And then we have the divorce rate and all. I don't know if you're seeing all of this content about red flags to avoid, how to avoid a narcissist, blah, blah, blah. It's like part of the reason our society, back to the men and women conversation, is so at war with each other is because of the things we're seeing on social media, and sometimes in front of our own eyes, where it's like, oh my God, it's horrible. But you have to look at what's possible and then believe that that's...
Yeah, and also this idea of like, oh, you're gonna... One of the things that's happened is people now have certain ideas about what they're supposed to want and not, when they're not. That's not how you actually are supposed to meet somebody. Like you don't really know the other person fully. Like, okay, let's say this is what a narcissist looks like. Avoid them. Okay, well, I'm a bit of a narcissist. And some narcissism is good, right?
Have you ever read The Laws of Human Nature by Robert Greene?
No.
He's the guy who wrote 48 Laws of Power, The Art of Seduction, etc. I actually think you'd like his work a lot.
I'm sure.
And he talks about how we're all narcissistic on a spectrum, and the only people that we should really avoid are the people that have like evil narcissism, which is completely separate from this spectrum. Which, by the way, if you're on the spectrum, if you're self-aware enough, you can like toggle between sides.
Right.
So I thought that was interesting.
But my point is like, if you see a guy do one thing that makes you think he's a bit of a narcissist,
and you avoid him completely,
that's dumb.
Yeah.
Right? It's like this thing about women on dating sites. They all say, oh, I don't want a man who's shorter than 6 foot. Or whatever the height is, right? That's dumb. That's dumb. I understand women, for biological evolutionary reasons, want a man who's taller than them. Okay. Or the same height. Well, I'm 5'9". I'm a couple of inches taller than my wife. The fact that I'm not 6 foot doesn't bother her, right?
Yeah, but also you're able to give speeches like that, so that just puts you in a...
Yeah, but when we got together, I was not the man that I am today.
I know.
Let me say something very controversial that everybody's known since forever, okay? It's the woman's job to help her man become what he's supposed to be.
That is very controversial today because everyone's expecting a complete version of what they want.
I mean...
I think, you know why I think it's
women
hard?
are very attracted to potential and ambition for that reason, right?
100%.
So you can get together with somebody who is not got anything, but like this guy's got potential, he's got ambition, and I'm gonna get him to get a new haircut. I'm gonna help him pick
Can I tell you where I think it gets controversial?
Well, I think we're already there, but carry on.
Yeah, but I mean, when I hear you say that, because one, I agree with you. On the other side of it, I'm like, as a woman, once you reach a certain age, you feel like there's no time for that because I need to bring a child into the world. The investment that I was able to make when I was 20, and I was with a guy who had no money and was sleeping on his mom's couch. Yeah. And I thought, oh, I'm going to help him become this man. And that didn't happen as fast as I had hoped.
Yep. And you are very driven and very ambitious.
Thanks. But at this age, I don't think I would be able to date a guy in that situation because I know there is a biological clock fact and that there's no time to turn that man into the man who does this, provides this, brings in this much is able to put me in a position where I can stop working, attend to my child, etc. That's the only place where I'm like,
oh no, I get it. I wouldn't argue with that at all. This is why this stuff is better to do early, in an ideal world. Like, and I understand it doesn't always work out, but
yeah.
But if we're talking about the ideal, that's the ideal. Two young people get together and make each other better over time, and by the time they're in their mid-30s, they're both crushing it in whatever way that they want to be.
You need to go into it with that mentality, like the way that you and your wife,
It's like, we are meant to be together. We're going to make this fucking work.
Yes, I like that mentality. I think there are some people who they don't go into it with that, and they're like, I want to become I want to discover the person I am and get to know myself better before I even make that decision. I think that's good too.
Mm-hmm.
But given everything you're saying, I also think we just need to have that happen a little earlier so everyone can.
The discovering who you are thing, I have some questions about that.
Okay,
because I think that when you have another person who loves you and who wants you to be the best version of you, you're going to discover who you are a lot quicker. And they will help you do that in a way that you yourself can't, if it's the right person.
I just think that, for example, I look at like the parent-child relationships,
Mm-hmm.
and I feel that a lot of times the child realizes who they are and they try to set the boundary with the parent, and the parent is already so the person that they are, and they can't change and they cannot evolve, and they refuse to go to therapy.
Mm-hmm.
And this is an experience that a lot of my friends have with their parents, or I don't know if you've had with your dad. And so if that were the case in a relationship, why get into that relationship at all?
It's a very different type of relationship between two people versus parent-child. It's
True.
very, very, very different.
True. But again, not everyone is mature enough to go into the marriage the way you and your wife did.
I was really not very mature.
Interesting.
At all.
And she helped you become that.
Yes.
How did she do that?
We had the belief that we're meant to be together, and then quite quickly we started having various problems in our relationship.
Yeah.
This wasn't working, that wasn't working, she wasn't happy about this, I wasn't happy about that.
Okay, so I'm thinking about the modern
Yeah.
experience that we're having.
Yeah.
Sorry to cut you off.
No, you're fine. Woman-splain me.
Woman-splain you. I'm ready. I feel like most people I know in that situation, and especially at that age, would be like, okay, I'm just going to go sleep with other girls then.
Yeah. And they're dumb.
And they're dumb.
Look, I always say this, again, controversial, whatever. I always saw dating as a single issue, single objective thing. To find your person and to get together with your person. And that's how my wife saw it. And when we found each other, we were like, okay, we found the right person. Now we build a relationship. And there were lots of times when we could easily have got divorced, and most people probably would have done. Arguments, fights, disagreements about money, disagreements about how to speak to each other, how to do this, how to do that. I've hurt my wife a shit ton with things that I've said. She's hurt me with a shit ton of the things that she's said and done. That's relationships. But because we knew we were meant to be together, we knew it was our job to work it out. And so we did. And the amazing thing is, we now live in a world in which if you want to work your relationship out, there is everything you need out there for that. There's courses, there's books, there's information, there's people who will give you good advice, there's things you can watch online. They'll be like, oh, the reason my wife says this is that, oh, okay, this is what I need to do.
And I love that. I think that where it gets dangerous is that there's also information in the other direction from like divorce lawyers and people who view the word exactly.
Perfect.
Right?
Now, here's the question for me. When I look at anyone online or anyone in person who's giving out advice, I ask the simple question, is this person happy? Are they fulfilled? And would I want to live like them?
That's it. That's the thing.
And when I look at some of these kind of like red pill influencers that you're talking about, I do not want their life one bit. I always thought the way that you build your life is by looking at things you do what you want, and then you learn from them.
That's why I became so obsessed with entrepreneurs. I told you,
Yeah.
they're all problem solvers.
Right.
They see a problem and they're like, all right, let's figure out a solution. Whereas a lot of other people are trained to be like, oh my God, I have a problem. I'm a victim. I'm going to identify with my trauma more than I identify with as a human being who can problem solve their way out of this. So I like those questions. I think the questions that you asked are what everyone needs to be asking when looking for role models, especially on the internet, which is probably the most dangerous place to look for them.
Right. So you have to be very discerning, and you have to go, is this person living the life that I want to live? Like, when I meet Tom Billy from Impact Today, I know we've mentioned about 50 times.
Yeah.
I go, this guy has an incredible mind. I want to learn from this guy. So
yeah.
every time I spend time with him, I'm like, Tom, how do I do this? Tell me about this. How do I do that? What about this? What if you think about...
That's so funny because that's how I feel about you.
Okay.
Which is great.
Which is great. And
well, because you have one of the things that I want.
Yeah, sure. And he has one of the things that I want.
Which is what? Billions of dollars?
No.
Okay.
He has an incredible amount of clarity about how he thinks and what he thinks and why he thinks it. And he's just like, I go, Tom, we're thinking about doing this with Trigger Media. And he's like, oh, yeah, that's a terrible idea. And the way he says it is, I don't feel judged. I'm just like, this is a friend of mine who's giving me useful information.
Yeah. And by the way, I see him as an entrepreneur first.
Yes.
Problem solver.
Yeah,
So
completely.
he's a great guy to get advice from. Even when he was here, he was giving him and his wife gave me tons of useful advice.
I'm sure. So you look at people. I remember the first time I did any kind of personal development, I went to see this guy who he does he does like hypnotherapy and NLP and a bunch of various other things.
Yeah.
And he said to me, he said, there are some people who come to a party, and some people go to where the girls are. Some people go for the booze. Some people go and find a nerd to talk to. And there are some people who just turn up and look around and go, I wonder what I want to do. And they take their time, and then they go to where they want to go. And I was like, I want that. And he was like, okay, well, this is how you get it.
How?
Ultimately, it's about confidence, right? So we talked about that. That's what it's about. But my point was broader than that specific issue.
Okay.
My point was, you want to follow and listen to people who do what you want to do and live the life that you want to live. So, for example, I'm not interested in having lots of fast cars and having a big chest and sleeping with random women. So influencers who talk about that have absolutely no interest for me. I'm not saying they're right or wrong or whatever. It's just not the lifestyle that I want, right? And that's kind of my advice to everybody else is like, look around and think, is this the kind of person that I want to be or not? And the thing that nobody tells young people these days is fast cars, lots of women, lots of guys, even lots of money doesn't make you happy. I'm not saying money's bad.
Fame too.
Oh, fame makes people miserable because it's hard.
As your profile has grown, and you've gotten more recognizable, do you think that's affected many things in your life?
I am only recognizable by the people who like me, so no. Like, I get recognized a lot, but everyone who comes up to me likes me and is positive towards me.
I want to talk to you in a few years about this.
Yeah, I've said this to, and everybody on my crew knows this, I don't want to be Joe Rogan famous.
Yeah.
That doesn't appeal to me at all. However, the problem is that if you want to make an impact, which I do, then the more famous you are, the bigger the impact you make. So, so it may be a trade-off that you take. But generally speaking, it's for me, my life is great, and the level of fame I currently have is healthy.
I agree with you. As I've gotten to know a lot of the people that I look up to, they say never meet your heroes, right? Some of them are incredible. I've gotten to know them, and I look up to them even more than I did before. Others I've met, and I don't know, kind of in the billionaire elite camps, and you get to know them, and their marriages are a disaster. They're cheating on their wives with prostitutes on yachts. And it's so, the reality of who they are is so starkly different than what you saw on social media or however, in whatever form they're famous. And sometimes it's dangerous to get advice from those people because they can give you advice about certain things and not others. And it's important to make that distinction, but you don't know. Like, I wouldn't have known about some of these people until I got into their worlds. And that's kind of, I don't know, that just makes me hesitant even more about who I take advice from. But I think we just need to be better about who we elevate, especially, like, I know you feel like you have a responsibility to point people in the right direction. But I think we need to be careful about who we take advice from in which arena. For example, someone may give really good investing advice and be a badass entrepreneur, but will give you shit advice on marriage.
Yeah.
They'll tell you, don't do it. It's too hard. Maybe that was their experience, and it won't be yours. So I think those 3 questions that you mentioned earlier are really powerful.
Absolutely. So, yeah, I think what the internet is doing is promoting a lot of people who are giving bad advice. But not enough people, particularly young people, have been told what to look for. And so they're like, oh, maybe cigars and hoes is where it's at. you know?
Yeah.
And look, a friend of mine has got me into cigars. Cigars are pretty nice, but they're not the meaning of life. They're not what fulfills you. And not enough young people have been told that the thing that gives your life meaning and purpose fundamentally is the connections you make with other human beings. And the closest of those are always going to be your family.
And then your friends.
And then your friends.
How has fatherhood changed you?
Makes me into a pussy.
How?
It softens a man a lot.
Like, okay, how?
Whenever I meet anybody now who's behaving in a way that I don't like, I always, once you see a baby in its purity and innocence, you go, everybody was that once. And then life and family and, you know, destiny and fate, whatever, came and knocked lumps out of them. And that's why they're fucked up now. So I have a lot more empathy for people as a result. But the other thing is, it's really giving me a meaning and a drive and a purpose, even more than the one I had before.
What was the one you had before?
The one I had before was building Trigger Media, making an impact on the world, challenging toxic narratives, bringing healthier ways of thinking into the world. But now, the future is, I said this, somebody asked me about this before, the future is not an abstraction anymore. The future is my son. So when I think about the world and where it's going, I'm not thinking about it kind of from a like intellectual perspective. It's like, it's real to me now, you know. And also, it's just such a source of joy that in the past I'd come home and I'd be tired and this and whatever. And now I come home and he's just there smiling and happy, and you know, it changes how you see the world fundamentally. Yeah. And also, you know, it's made me a better leader for sure. It's made me a better leader because when you're communicating with the son, my wife's an incredible mother. She's very intuitive. She understands what he needs in whatever moment. When you're communicating with someone like that, you realize that most people are very well intentioned, but it's just about finding out how to communicate with them, how to get them to see what you're trying to say in a way that works for them. Because with a 16-month-old, it's you know, you have to be very, very simple about these things, you know.
Yeah.
So yeah, fatherhood's amazing, absolutely amazing.
And motherhood.
I have no idea.
I've heard. I've heard.
Yeah. Well, my wife certainly loves it. I mean, 3 months into the pregnancy, like I said, used to be obsessed. She's a brilliant photographer. She used to be obsessed with her career, like more driven than me, etc. Just obsessive. And 3 months into the pregnancy, she came to me and she was like, yeah, I don't want to work. I was like, okay, cool, let's do it.
I love it.
And she now says, I mean, it won't be true of everybody and blah, 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 exceptions. But she says the greatest gift a man can give his wife is to provide for her the opportunity to be with her children.
I would agree with that. I've talked to enough women that it's not that they all want to do that.
Mm-hmm.
It's that knowing that the option to do that fully is there makes a woman feel safe.
Yeah.
It just does.
Yeah.
Even now, as I'm like dating, I do think about that. Given that there are so many insufficient role models out there who are going viral and affecting so many people, who do you think are people that are good role models that you wish society elevated?
Well, I mean, we talked about Tom a lot, this podcast, for a reason.
Yeah.
Definitely very good.
Yeah.
I thought there was a moment when Jordan Peterson really broke through. And I thought the reason he broke through was that he was saying some very important things.
Yeah.
I don't know that, it's very difficult to have that level of negative attention that he's had. And so I think sometimes he can say things on Twitter that, we all do sometimes say that wouldn't necessarily paint us in the best light. But I thought a lot of the advice that he was giving was very useful. There's a woman called Louise Perry in the UK who I really like, and she has some very interesting things to say. She wrote a book called The Case Against the Sexual Revolution. And she's young, she's got a family, but she's also super smart, super interesting. She's got interesting ideas, incredibly articulate, beautiful woman, blah, 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 blah. I kind of think of her as like the female Jordan Peterson. In
Really?
some ways.
Okay,
Yeah.
I'm gonna look into her.
Yeah, check out her work. I also think then beyond that, you have to look at, we talked about looking at role models and going like, well, you're good at this thing, so I'm going to take that from you.
Yes.
I think that's a very important distinction. For example, like Dana White, to me, is a huge inspiration in terms of like building a thing.
Yes.
From the ground up.
Yes.
Amazing. Does that mean that we're very different people? I wouldn't emulate everything he does or says or the way he behaves. But in terms of business and drive and ambition and vision, incredible guy. So I think it really fundamentally depends on in terms of relationships. John Gray, incredible. Like I read all his books and I think they're incredibly useful for relationships, for dating, for all of that. And then it just depends on, I think sometimes people want a role model to be somebody public.
And it doesn't have to
Ideally, it's much better to have a role model that you know personally because you can talk to them.
Very good point.
And ask them questions. So if you have, if your parents had a happy marriage, you can ask them how they did,
Yeah.
Or if your cousin's got a successful business, ask them how they do it or whatever. That's really cool. And also, sports people, for young people in particular, like for me, Michael Jordan was a great hero.
Oh my God.
Because he had such drive and such ambition, but he was also cool and collected with it. He was a gentleman as well.
Yeah. Have you seen Deion Sanders recently blowing up?
No.
I'll send him to you.
Please.
Yeah, he's incredible.
Yeah.
I totally agree with you, and we need to find more of them.
Yeah. I think in some ways, do you know what? Elon Musk is a very controversial figure.
Very.
And I don't know him personally. I don't know what his personal life is like.
But he's subscribed to your Twitter.
He is subscribed to my Twitter. Therefore, he's a role model for all of you. What I like about him is that he has vision on a scale that nobody else does. Whether you agree with that vision or not, I personally see a lot of value in what he's saying. And he's prepared to put his money where his mouth is and go for it. And most important of all, ignore the naysayers and just be like, this is what I believe, this is what I'm going to do. It's going to work out. That's super important. That vision is super important.
Yeah.
So in that respect, he's a massive role model. which is a guy who has a belief in something that's bigger than him and is prepared to go for it. You know, he didn't buy Twitter for $44 billion to look cool. I'm sure
He actually didn't look cool to a lot of people when he did it.
he may have thought that he does look cool doing it. I have no idea, right? But that isn't the real reason. He bought it because he wants to change the way that the conversations happen.
Yeah.
That to me is inspiring. People who have a vision of something that's bigger than them, bigger than just, oh, I want to make loads of money, bigger than just, what is the impact you want to make on the world? People who think like that are incredibly inspiring to me because that's how I want to think.
That's how I think. I mean, of course, as a byproduct, I care about money. You know that.
Yeah, but it all comes. That. Yeah, you care about money.
Yeah, but the primary thing that drives me is that I want to shift the attention. Mm-hmm. Always, that's what I'm looking to do.
Yeah.
That's why I ask every single guest about their relationships. Every single person, if they're in a relationship or married, comes on this podcast, and I make them talk about how their relationship affects their lives because it's very related. It's very relatable, and people can draw a lot from that.
And do you think that people who have that, it's easier for them to do other things successfully in life?
Yeah, I do. I do think so. Yeah. Of course, there are people who are successful who, they're not with one person.
Yeah.
But I think in terms of general fulfillment and happiness, the people who have someone, they just have so much more of what, the connection that we need to sustain ourselves, and that they feel like they belong to someone, and that gives them everything they need to move forward. If you have the right partner, I've seen that the people who have that, they thrive 10 times more than the people who don't. And I think that's one message I want everyone to take from like every episode, which is why I keep asking you these questions, because I can see it, and you've told me privately how much your wife has affected your life. So I don't think you're Konstantin, this voice without your wife behind you. I see you as Konstantin, this man who's evolving over time in a positive way because you have that.
That's true.
Yeah. Okay, there's one question that I ask everybody on this podcast. The reason I ask it, and it's a hypothetical scenario, is because people have so many messages they want to share, but it's hard to prioritize. It's hard to prioritize the message that, one, matters to you most, and two, you feel like needs to urgently be shared right now in this day and age. So here's the scenario. You're at the Oscars because you're nominated for, let's say, a documentary about wokeism ruining our country, being the U.S.
I mean, that is a real hypothetical.
That's why I'm giving it to you.
Yeah.
This is you personally.
Yeah.
You're nominated for this. And they announce all the other nominees. Finally, they announce the winner, and it's you.
Okay.
You walk up to the stage. You thank everybody you need to thank. Your crew, Francis, your wife, your son.
He hasn't done anything.
It doesn't matter. I just feel like you would mention him by that point.
Maybe.
When this documentary's out.
Yeah.
Because you've.
Okay.
Anyway, so after you've thanked everyone you need to thank, there's about 45 seconds to 1 minute where you can say whatever you want. And there's going to be headlines, and it's going to go viral, and it'll be everywhere for days and permanently on YouTube, and people are going to go watch it over and over again. We see that with other speeches. What are you going to say? What message is so important to you that you're going to use that 45 seconds to get the word out?
We said it already today. Let's do what works.
That's it.
That's it. Let's do what works. Let's look at reality and do what works. Let's stop pretending to be good and let's start being good.
Amen. All right, well, thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
And this was a great conversation.
This was awesome. Appreciate you.